Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Paul Puckett, the director of the Enterprise Cloud Management Agency at the Army. And Paul, I guess that's one of the things we should maybe mention, that you are now an agency, no longer an office, as when we spoke last year at the Cloud Exchange. That's kind of an elevation of the duties and of the whole enterprise and cloud, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And thanks for having me on, Tom.
Well, let's talk about the purposes and aims of all of this, kind of set the background. And recently you outlined 6 objectives for the cloud related services that you offer through the agency. And let's talk about those objectives, and then we'll back in and fill in with how you help people reach those objectives. But I think that's a good place to start.
Sure thing, Tom. So back in 2019, the Army stood up the Enterprise Cloud Management Office. Then we were a directorate of the CIO G6 at the time, under General Bruce Crawford. And the purpose of the ECMO is to accelerate the adoption of cloud computing, because if you look at the history of the Army when it comes to cloud infrastructure, cloud native design, there have been a number of kind of initiatives. It's in kind of spurts of activity, but typically that was found more so program by program by program. And the then secretary at the time articulated, hey, cloud is foundational to where the Army's trying to go around all things within the digital age. And we really need to adopt cloud computing at scale across the Army, not just for the big programs, but everywhere. And so they stood up the Enterprise Cloud Management Office to essentially do just that, establish a strategy and start to deliver some services. But we found that essentially the policy and governance role of the CIO G6 at the time, we needed to move beyond that. And so there was this recognition that we needed to move more into the execution, the implementation side of the house, actually delivering capabilities for the Army. And so the now Enterprise Cloud Management Agency became a field operating agency. And I report to the Chief Information Officer, who is now Dr. Raj Iyer. When we first stood up back in 2019, did essentially a little bit of research across the Army, trying to understand what went wrong. And we codified what we believe was the right strategy in the 2020 cloud plan that you were referring to. And so we've had some 6 objectives that have been out there for quite some time. The first objective really aligns with the vision of the ECMA, and the vision being delivering digital overmatch through data-driven outcomes at the speed of mission relevance. You don't really hear a whole bunch of different things about cloud infrastructure in that vision, because really we see cloud as enabling to that vision. Really, our ability to make decisions in real time requires digital infrastructure, globally accessible and secure. And so we feel that the cloud is a key enabler to that vision that we have. But that really is the first objective, is to accelerate our data-driven decisions. Building off of that, there are a few kind of other things that have to go along with that. If we're going to essentially make data-driven decisions at the speed of need, we need to decrease the time it actually takes for us to field capabilities. Often we talk about feedback loops with the users of our capabilities, but oftentimes we don't think about how we accelerate the delivery of what we think might solve their problems. So we think that second one is really important, is decreasing the time it takes to field. And then complement to that is we need to accelerate essentially our processes, especially around security and security accreditation. Very thankful for the continuous ATM memo that just came out. But think of all of our processes to test and validate that something is secure or actually functioning appropriately. Think about the actual user acceptance testing that goes along with that, the interoperability testing. A lot of those processes are pretty cumbersome today. So essentially, we need to accelerate those processes. Fourth with that is we also need to start to design these systems to actually leverage cloud infrastructure. We often say that the cloud is somebody else's data center, but it's much more than that. And it's really this forcing function for us to reimagine, redesign our systems, our services, our business processes, and start to leverage ad hoc, cloud infrastructure in an ad hoc type of scalable way. And we think that the need for that is because it's an ever-changing world. And this fifth objective that we have is starting to design ourselves to be adaptable in real time. Oftentimes we talk about being agile, but if we start to look at some of the things that differentiates agility, it's the ability to pivot. It's the ability to be able to accept changing requirements late in the process and to be able to move seamlessly with those requirements. So you have to design for that, your business processes, your environments, your technology, your people, your organizations. They have to adapt. And this became even more evident right when COVID hit. Everyone all of a sudden became a distributed workforce working from home. How do we adapt in real time and actually have the systems to support our mission? And then finally, sixth being cost transparency. We want to drive the greatest return on investment when it comes to how we leverage cloud infrastructure. And I think that that's really important for how we estimate, how we actually, budget and program for what it is that we're going to spend. But when you're starting to consume a utility, you need to talk about your actual efficiency in consuming that utility in context of your actual mission and whether you're delivering that. So those 6 objectives we put together in the cloud plan that actually we're just about to release the updated cloud plan in 2022. And I'd say that those 6 objectives really haven't changed, but part of the pieces of the how we start to deliver that and who the players are across the Army and the DoD, I think is really important, especially when we talk about nesting with the new Army digital transformation strategy that the Army CIO has put out and that the Secretary has endorsed. And so as the community grows and as the outcomes grow, we want to start to scale those outcomes as well as how we do that. Putting out the strategy and then the subsequent cloud plan we think is really important. Those 6 objectives in 2020 really laid a foundation for what we've done in the last 2 years, but there's so much more to do. And so we felt it was time for us to update that cloud plan and put that out to the field.
All right, and we're going to get to that plan and to the new digital strategy, but I just wanted to comment on something you mentioned in the second objective, which was to faster field capabilities. And I think that's really profound because when you think of all of the ways the Army is doing the mission of the Army as a whole, so much of that is software enabled, so much of that is intelligence based, so much of that happens in cyberspace, that you're not just talking about software capabilities like for business systems, although it might be that also, but really tactical. And the tooth of the Army is enabled in many ways by software. Fair way to put it?
Absolutely a fair way to put that. I think that's even captured and codified in the G6's Unified Network Plan. Because when we start to unify enterprise and tactical domains, when we start to enhance that connectivity, really that tissue, if you will, for how we send information, that's ultimately critical. That's us receiving data and feedback from the field, but then our ability to deliver new capabilities and services where possible over the wire is critical. And I think that's part of the realization when it comes to cloud infrastructures. There's this global digital infrastructure that has to be thoughtfully designed for our ability to now respond in real time, whether that's with direction or whether that's with software. So the ability to think that now I can actually have the entire global Army operating some mission capability off of the exact same baseline and configuration. And I've got the ability to adapt in real time with new capabilities and services to enhance the mission based off of data that I've learned. That's absolutely critical. And far too often we've seen that essentially severed relationship between the enterprise, often aligned with business systems, and the tactical domain, often aligned with warfighting and intel systems. And those two worlds have to come together, especially if we talk about joint all-domain command and control. We can't have these things be two separate ecosystems. And that's actually, I've said this before, a pain point, but also something I've been adamant about is being called the Enterprise Cloud Management Office and now agency. People thought, oh, well, you're just for business systems. The answer is no, this is the big E enterprise. We've got to unify these. And I think the Unified Network Plan that the G6 and General Morrison put out, I think helps really codify that strategy and that vision.
All right, let's get to that digital strategy of the Army, the update there, the digital transformation strategy, and then we'll get to the cloud strategy. But the updated digital transformation strategy, I'm imagining, is driving everything else that's going on all the way down the line.
Absolutely, especially in the space of digital. The Army's had their modernization strategy, but Dr. I felt it was extremely important for us to start to put out a digital transformation strategy. How do we start to understand the way that we leverage technology and align our business processes and our organizations and our people to be able to start to leverage and lead technology into the future? When we talk about competing in the digital age, I think it's really important to articulate that strategy and understand the different pieces and how they start to fit together. And then naturally the data plan and the cloud plan can align and essentially start to give more concrete answers of like how we're going to actually deliver on those visions. And so the ADTS, you can dive into it, but essentially there's three kind of main strategic lines of effort. We've got our modernization and readiness side of the house. We've got our reform side of the house, and then we've got our people and our partnerships. You're going to see a lot of the cloud-enabled capabilities, the global security capabilities start to fall into that modernization and readiness side of the house. You're going to start to see some of the common services and capabilities that we as an Army need to start to tap in and design, once and then reuse at scale when we talk about the adoption of digital services in the digital domain. We think that that's really important. There's a whole bunch of sub lines of effort that fall into that modernization and readiness category. But really, it's starting to get after more of the foundational enterprise services and capabilities that we need to scale. That then leads into complementing when it comes to the actual reform side of the house. Like when we start to talk about our investments in capabilities, I'll give an example. So much of that we've done has been program by program by program. And a lot of the commonality and reusability is actually resources, time that's invested in really duplicative manners, program to program to program. But as we start to unpack and want to share this data, there's some of these common foundational things that need to happen, and that impacts then how we resource in those systems. And so we think that that's really important to start to pull some of the more common things out and invest in those in a bit more of a big E enterprise way. Think of some of the software licensing things that need to be pulled out of that. Some of the attributes when it comes to evaluating audit and readiness, like there are some things that we need to start to unearth really in data that allows us to see these different systems now start to interface in a more common way for how we make those investments and then see the realization in the mission. And then finally, the third.
Just as an aside there, let me just cut in for a second on that, on a side on that one. Many of those high priority items might not be big dollar items relative to some of the big cost items the Army has, but in some ways they're more crucial to enabling everything else to be more efficient and more up to date.
Well, and I think you bring up a really good point. I'll kind of tie the modernization and readiness and then the reform one together here. Is I'll even say a lot of the foundational stuff that we're doing within the ECMA, it's not really a big dollar investment, but it has one of the greatest impacts, I would argue, when it comes to people and process for really some of the things that steal a whole bunch of our time and our joy. So it's a small investment. It has such an immense reusability and scale aspect to it that reduces a lot of the toil program by program by program. Like if we just unpack some of the basics things that we do in the ECMA is we've got a construct to buy cloud infrastructure as a service and platform as a service and software as a service. And we've got an environment, a secure hosting environment that we call C-Army that actually essentially is hosting applications and services and data for the Army. Just those two things alone, relatively small investment. But when it comes to the vehicles, like the mechanisms, as well as the environments, the lead time to adopt cloud infrastructure, which for most programs was about the 9 to 12 month kind of initiative, now all of a sudden is we've got people building an environment within a matter of 2 weeks. Just a recent initiative in support of some things that are happening around the world, a capability that essentially got briefed into an IETT in about 3 days for us to start to test some interfaces. And then that capability is now operational live and accredited, all within the matter of probably about 3 weeks tops. That speed is a huge impact for people. And so I think it's a beautiful segue is those small investments for reusable capabilities that were designed thoughtfully, leveraging cloud infrastructure can have an immense impact on the way that we do business. And the third LOE of the digital transformation strategy is getting after people and partnerships. We captured this when we talked about building the digital acumen, right? The actual the skill sets and the knowledge to leverage cloud infrastructure and the cloud plan. But think even beyond that is we need general officers and senior executives that understand how to lead technology and weave it in through everything that we do. And then understanding how data starts to really piece together. There are these skill sets that we need across our strategic leadership within the Army, as well as across every single organization within the Army to leverage technology and data at scale. And so getting after our partnerships, getting after our people, some of the training that needs to happen there. We think that's one of the most paramount pieces to the digital transformation strategy. So I'll pause there, but those are the three main lines of effort: the modernization readiness, the reform, as well as the people and partnerships.
All right. And that leads to what you mentioned earlier, which is an updated cloud strategy, which supports, I imagine, the digital transformation strategy. So tell us what's new in the cloud strategy.
Absolutely. So if you look into the cloud plan, so if you go read the cloud plan, the first little bit reads a little bit like a strategy, but then you start to see a number of the pieces of the how. So some of those kind of foundational things that I just said, a mechanism for buying cloud infrastructure at scale. We call that CAMO. It's the Cloud Account Management Optimization. And so we've got that service in place. And then we've got Army, where we took our first swings when it came to delivering a secure cloud ecosystem for hosting Army mission. We focused on leveraging public commercial cloud offerings on the unclassified and the secret side of the house, and predominantly within the continental United States, because we wanted to go to an environment that was mature, that allowed us to start to learn how we can start to redesign a lot of our systems, start to tap into our data and our capability, build the skill sets of soldiers and civilians across the Army, and demonstrate the value of this enterprise service model of cloud access. But really now in 22 and into 23 and moving forward is that mission needs to start to expand. And so when we start to think about how thoughtful we are with our on-premise resources and leveraging virtual environments there to really function as a private cloud is really critical, especially when we talk about outside the continental United States, where data sovereignty is a concern. And so we need to start to essentially bring private clouds in an OCONUS manner. And so what you're going to see us focus on in this cloud plan for 2022 revision is you're going to see a number of these things start to nest within the digital transformation strategy, start to call out specific alignment, because we want to give people vectors. We want people to be able to read the digital transformation strategy and then see specifically in the cloud plan, what is actually nesting and what is a demonstration of how to deliver on this vision when it comes to digital transformation, especially in the domain of cloud. So you're going to see those common services and that architecture start to expand globally. You're going to start to see a focus then on more software-defined kind of ecosystems, if you will, as we move away from this physical scaffolding of the DoD into this more zero trust architecture, is moving to essentially untrusted devices, untrusted networks, assuming everything should not be trusted. That starts to open up our tap into commercial resources and capabilities, both from a transport as well as a compute and storage perspective. So you're going to start to see some of that growth in the architecture in the cloud plan. But you're also going to see more enterprise services. You're going to see more things that we see common reuse and value to start to deliver once to allow many to scale. And you're really going to see a big double click when it comes to how we want to start to unlock and open up the power of data. I've said recently here, we've always said it's all about the data, and that's very true. But I would argue that really across the DoD, especially within the Army, we didn't have the digital infrastructure that actually would allow us to leverage the power of our data. We didn't have some of the common tools and capabilities to really start to unlock and unpack the value that can come from our data. And when you talk about the amount of data that we create, the learning that has to be done from that data, we need an immense amount of storage and compute, and more storage and compute than we could ever predict and then go and build within a private data center. And so that value of ad hoc resources within cloud infrastructure is really the critical enabler. But as that mission grows and scales, your digital infrastructure has to be thoughtfully and securely designed to scale with it. Because any chink in that armor, we've seen this in the commercial world, any chink in that armor becomes a major risk to your data and how you learn. So we've got to ensure that that foundation was built. And that's why Army is so important, especially when we talk about this being a joint effort and how we communicate and translate and interoperate with all of the other services, all of the different systems and different data sets that, quite frankly, are going through the same modernization journey that we are in the Army. That's a challenging thing to do thoughtfully. And so we need the infrastructure designed to grow with it. We believe we've set that foundation over the course of the last 2 years. And now it's time to take that truly at scale across the Army and the DoD.
And just a detailed question on the technology. When you mention OCONUS, where there is sometimes not the bandwidth reach back to, say, continentally based clouds, it's now possible to almost replicate the cloud as a software element at pretty large storage and compute capacity, all in a suitcase now, as opposed to dragging all of this gear around. Is that part of what's enabling this?
Absolutely, and there are really layers to that. So if you dive into some of the work that the OCONUS Cloud Working Group is doing on behalf of the DoD CIO, you're going to start to see this tiered model, and we've adopted it as well. But really, there's this kind of global reach capability, typically served by capabilities within the continental United States. But then you're going to start to see some of these kind of more operational needs that are really geographic region specific. And then even kind of a third tier beyond that, which is a bit more disconnected from the big E enterprise that most would talk about. But as you start to seep into the tactical domains, there's a bit more of a form factor approach when it comes to still, at some point, physical compute and storage resources. But the value of cloud infrastructure, when we start to talk about online on-demand self-service, resource-pooled capabilities, broad network access, we're starting to name some of the characteristics of how that physical infrastructure is leveraged in the virtual domain, and that common resource pool of compute globally and how it all connects. That's really the thing that starts to really empower us and enable us globally. But you've got to design some of those specific form factors and capabilities. You've got to build the actual physical transport, whether that is undersea cable, whether it's fiber that's been laid in the ground, whether it's line of sight, or tapping into some of the great capabilities of low Earth orbit and medium Earth orbit when it comes to higher bandwidth, lower latency comms that can start to bounce around in the sky when it comes to delivering persistent communication and data to those in the tactical domains. So all of that has to be woven together thoughtfully, especially, like I said, when outside the continental United States, data sovereignty matters. And our value and how we tap into encryption of data in transit, at rest, and at use is really critical when we start to think about how we're going to operate within very contested environments, especially when we know and we see adversaries are creating space for kinetic actions in a non-kinetic world. They're in the digital domain trying to break somebody's communications, make them not trust their data, make them start to question what information they're seeing and what they're visualizing. And essentially that space that's being created in the unknown, that's then when kinetic action is taken. And so we've got to be masters of that digital domain and that non-kinetic space where we can always have the greatest uptime, the greatest availability, the greatest security and awareness for us to make data-driven decisions. And that's got to be something that is designed and then delivered as a global asset. And that's why we think that this is such a critical resource to the way that we fight, because without good comms, without good data, in the digital world that we live in today, you really start to question where you are, what it is that you're trying to do. And we don't want anyone to erode that confidence. And so we've got to be masters within that space so that we can fight and win.
All right. We're speaking with Paul Puckett. He's director of the Enterprise Cloud Management Agency at the Army. We'll present part 2 of our Army perspective after we get a view from industry. Let's go back to the studio right now for more of the DoD Cloud Exchange.